This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday the 8th of May here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, the US pauses a shipment of bombs to Israel amid growing concern over a Rafah invasion.
China is suspected of carrying out a major hack on UK defence personnel data.
And Computer says no, the UK border gate system is temporarily thrown into chaos after an outage.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The United States has paused a shipment of bombs to Israel after its military seized control of the Rafah border crossing in Gaza. A senior US official told Bloomberg the decision was made in response to Israel nearing a decision to launch a military offensive on the southern Gaza city. It comes after the White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said the US had reiterated its concerns about civilian casualties to Israeli authorities.
What we've been told by our Israeli counterparts is that this operation last night was limited and designed to cut off Hamas's ability to smuggle weapons and funds into Gaza. Now, our views on Rafah have remained the same. We've repeatedly and consistently expressed those views about a major operation in Rafah in densely populated areas that would give higher risk to civilians and civilian casualties. President Biden made that very clear yesterday when he spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I said yesterday, and we're going to be monitoring this situation very, very closely to see how it unfolds.
That's John Kirby speaking there. The US has long been Israel's largest military backer, but President Biden has called on the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do more to protect civilians in Gaza.
Bloomberg has learned that JP Morgan is limiting its dealings with Santi Capital Management after the Asian hedge fund giant was charged with insider trading in Hong Kong. Santi said that it intends to defend itself vigorously against those charges, which were also levelled at founder Simon Sadler and a former trader. The fund has been a prized client of Wall Street banks that need to unload chunks of shares in block trades and stock offerings. According to people Bloomberg spoke to, JP Morgan informed Santi this week of the decision not to engage it on new block trades or IPOs, although they added the situation is fluid and could change.
It's likely that China is using UK payroll data to map out Britain's defence network. Cyber experts tell Bloomberg a hack of a Ministry of Defence contractor which compromised the personal data of as many as 272,000 armed personnel could be part of a mass intelligence gathering exercise. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak declined to blame China directly for the breach, but said he's taking a tough stance towards the country.
I set out a very robust policy towards China, which means that we need to take the powers which we have done to protect ourselves against the risk that China and other countries pose to us. They are a country with fundamentally different values to ours. They're acting in a way that is more authoritarian at home, assertive abroad.
Despite the Prime Minister's words, government officials have attributed the cyber attack to China. China strongly denies reports that it's behind the hack, but the fresh data breach comes as national security concerns towards the country mount.
President Xi Jinping says that he will never forget the US bombing of China's embassy in Belgrade 25 years ago. The leader made the comments in an editorial as he arrived in Serbia on the second leg of his European tour. Bloomberg's Asia politics correspondent Rebecca Chung-Wilkins explains what he's signalling with the comments.
It is a really pivotal and important moment in the public consciousness in China that isn't always necessarily understood outside of China, because it helps seed this mistrust of the US and this mistrust of NATO.
Chung Wilkins adds that Serbia is far more economically and politically friendly to both China and Russia than most other European countries. Ties between the two have strengthened, even as Beijing's border relationship with Europe frays over human rights issues and trade concerns.
The United States has revoked export licenses allowing Intel and Qualcomm to supply China's Huawei with semiconductors. We're told the withdrawal affects US sales of chips for use in Huawei phones and laptops. Officials say the move is key to preventing China from developing advanced AI. The US is also considering sanctions against 6 Chinese firms that could supply chips to Huawei.
ByteDance has started legal proceedings against the US in an effort to repeal the TikTok divest or ban law. It could be a long legal battle and suggests that ByteDance is not planning to sell the app by the January deadline. Bloomberg's Mike Shepherd has more.
Since President Joe Biden signed the bill into law last month, TikTok and its owners, Beijing-based ByteDance, have been preparing this legal challenge, and they're doing so on First Amendment grounds. They're laying the groundwork for a serious constitutional challenge to this law, saying that it will infringe the free speech rights of 170 million TikTok users.
As Mike Shepherd says, TikTok has argued the law stifles free speech, but the Biden administration could be forced to reveal classified or sensitive information about why the law is justified. ByteDance says selling TikTok is unfeasible commercially, technically and legally.
A glitch in the UK's electronic border gate system has been fixed, but not before the problem caused long lines and chaotic scenes at some of the country's major airports. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
Airports around the country were reduced to manually processing passengers yesterday evening after system outages caused a nationwide issue. Heathrow, Edinburgh and Manchester were amongst those affected after electronic border gates went offline. According to a Home Office statement, the problem was detected just before 8 p.m, triggering a response within minutes. The system came back online just before midnight. Authorities say border security was not compromised and there was no sign of malicious cyber activity. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
In a moment, we'll get more on the latest developments in the Middle East, plus the details of that hack of data of UK military personnel. But another story that caught our eye this morning. Caroline, are you familiar with the item that's been dubbed the Millennial Birkin?
I did not know it was called that, no. But
so
describe it.
This is the Uniqlo shoulder bag, some of it called the banana bag, the dumpling bag. It looks a bit like, to those of us that are a bit older, a bum bag essentially that you wear over your shoulder.
Oversized, yeah.
But it's something that was launched in 2020, became a viral TikTok feature star after a video that was posted in 2022. It's had absolutely massive sales. It's only around £15 in the UK, about $20 in the US to buy. Now, Fast Retailing doesn't provide sales figures for this particular item, but it's being attributed, they do describe it as their best-selling item in some markets, and it is being attributed to them expecting a nearly 10% jump in revenue in the current fiscal year. They're having to come up with lots of new iterations to try and keep up the momentum behind this wildly popular item. If you look now, you'll see them everywhere. And this is something that our colleague Mia Glass has been writing about in the terminal. She's even pointing out there are regional variations they've introduced. At the new Uniqlo store in Edinburgh, they have an Iron Brew branded version of this bag.
Bright orange, in blue. Wow. Okay, that's nuts. I am going to see these bags everywhere now. But listen, 15 quid is certainly, it's not going to rival a Birkin in terms of the hit to your wallet. So maybe that's good. Nice story on the Bloomberg terminal for you this morning. Now, the US has paused a shipment of some bombs and weapons to Israel after the Israeli military took control of the border crossing into Egypt and sent tanks into Rafah in southern Gaza. This is the Biden administration said that Israel and Hamas should be able to resolve their differences over a proposed ceasefire, contradicting Israeli officials who say the two sides are still far apart. Joining us now is Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson. Ros, good morning. What do we know about this pause in supplies to Israel?
Well, it's about 3,500 bombs all up, and these are heavier bombs, so around 2,000 pounds. And what we've learned is that they've paused this shipment. This was previously arranged some time ago, but it's a signal to the Israelis that the US is concerned about the possible use of those weapons in Gaza, particularly in Rafah, in an offensive in a highly densely populated area with a lot of civilians. So what they're saying is they're halting this shipment. They're not stopping it, they're just halting it. It's unclear exactly when that shipment might come, but separately they are saying they're going to proceed fully with the recent aid package that was passed through Congress and signed into law by the US President Joe Biden, and that's the large Israeli aid package. And that includes things to help Israel in its own defense, particularly the Iron Dome missile defense shield and so on. So they're not stepping away from supporting Israel militarily, and they've said again they support Israel's right to defend itself. But it is a bit of a further message from the US that they're concerned about what an offensive into Rafah might look like, a full ground offensive, and the potential use of US heavy bombs in such an offensive.
Ros, what is the latest we're hearing about Israeli preparations for that kind of offensive?
Well, we know that they've occupied the Rafah border crossing, and the UN is saying that no aid is coming in to Gaza. As a result, we also have doctors saying that people who were sick and needing medical treatment could not leave through the Rafah crossing yesterday. So that seems to be fully occupied. At this point, they've been conducting targeted strikes into Rafah, so particularly airstrikes, and there have been some casualties from that reported. They're not doing as yet a full ground offensive into Rafah, but they do seem to be laying the preparations for it. There are further efforts to entice people to move out of harm's way. Israel is urging people to do that. There are some signs that people are starting to relocate, but that's a very slow process. You have to move a lot of people out of the way quickly. You have to entice them to move. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people potentially. So we see the preparations for a potential full offensive in Rafah. It's unlikely to happen in the coming days because it will take time. And meantime, you still have those efforts from the US and others to try and persuade both Hamas and Israel to get to a ceasefire agreement that both of them can sign up to.
On those negotiations, what do we know? Israel says they're far apart, the US that they aren't, that they can come to an agreement.
Well, the US keeps saying it's confident they can get to a point of an agreement, and it really seems to come down to the language around, what does it signal from a ceasefire towards the permanent end to the war? What kind of language do you get into the agreement that suggests that it could be the precursor to the end of the war? And Israel's quite reluctant on that front. So it does seem to be about that, but they are still poles apart on it. And there's no sign of any progress in talks from yesterday on that front. Israel is still talking about a ceasefire, but no evidence of any progress whatsoever. And so, time is really running out on that front. And we're seeing the level of concern in the region. For example, the Omani foreign minister spoke with the Iranian foreign minister, and Oman's been kind of quiet on this front so far. So you're seeing those levels of concern in the region, Egypt, Oman, elsewhere, that the ceasefire talks might collapse entirely.
Now, China may be using data from a number of hacks against the UK to build profiles of British military personnel and other people in sensitive roles. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told Parliament hackers obtained details of as many as 272,000 British soldiers, sailors and Air Force pilots, saying that foreign state action could not be ruled out. Joining us now with more details is our UK politics reporter, James Wilcock. James, good morning. What do we know about the hack of this Ministry of Defence payroll provider?
Well, we know that hackers access that data, as you said, names, bank details, some addresses of serving military, reservists, potentially some veterans at a contractor. The one who have been blamed is Shared Services Connected Limited. Now, they themselves on their own website describe themselves as the largest provider of critical business support services to the UK government. That includes the Home Office, the Department for Work and Pensions, the Met Police, the Justice Ministry, to name a few. They are owned by Sopa Strainer. Now, the question is going forward is we know this data was accessed by these hackers. We don't know if it was stolen or removed or altered in any way. And so at play this morning is sort of the wide forensic operation as well as the blame game and the questions of was there other data potentially privy to this breach?
Yeah, and this can often take time. I mean, that individual contractor was named in Parliament, so we know that was confirmed by the minister. And RUSI, which is the kind of defence organisation, one of them think tank in the UK, saying that this is the weak link, isn't it? Look, China denies wrongdoing. That hasn't stopped the accusations.
No, and the accusations are come to the sort of a pattern of behaviour. I mean, it takes months to kind of actually publicly accuse a nation. Forensic cyber espionage is a very difficult operation. But you look at what MPs like Tom Tugendhat, who's a noted China hawk, points to 2021 when the Electoral Commission was publicly hacked, and that was a public accusation of China. 2022, where former pilots were being hired by the Chinese military from the RAF. That was seen as that. And just this year, there was a spearphishing attempt on MPs, which was pointed to a Huawei-based hacking group. And you look at the profiles of malign state actors, Russian-based hackers tend to go far more for sort of ransomware, smash and grab style attacks, whereas the profile of Chinese-based state cyber espionage, it tends to be about building up intelligence profiles of defense networks, especially of Five Eyes countries. And in that, this type of hack, which is based around data of noted defense personnel, fits a clear pattern, which is why cyber experts this morning talking to Bloomberg say this is quite clearly, in their view, a China-linked attack.
What is the government doing about this, James?
Well, they've started a review of FSCL. They have notably pointed out to Labour that this is why they should be investing 2.5% of GDP in defence. But it's worth noting the premise in your question, Stephen, that this is something the government should be talking about. In that, if you were to read back, cyber experts going back 20, 30 years would say, actually, in some ways, this is just part of modern espionage. And it is fascinating. The government are even noting it. Governments all the time try and build up profiles of rivals, nations, defence espionages. And so in that, this reflects in some ways the increasing frequency of cyber attacks, but also the changing tone towards China and how governments from the US around TikTok and the UK and other Five Eyes nations like Australia are increasingly calling out these kinds of attacks as a way of trying to raise the temperature and raise fears around national security.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.